Thank you. Thank you very much for the very elaborate introduction. I'm grateful for allowing me to speak today. And I've been to Leicester and I've spoken in one of your Sunday feasts, so I'm very
Yes.
familiar with the audience as well.
Yes.
And yes, I know most of you closely, very closely, because I've interacted with you in different capacities. So I'm very grateful that we are able to interact today. So I guess thank you, and we'll get started with
Yes, Prabhu.
um, with the approach. So I think I'm going to be, given the fact that we have time constraints and I have to cover the topics of three verses. What I would do is that I would kind of rearrange the verses in terms of rearrange the approach so that I have the ability to kind of address them as I see fit, and then we'll go forward. It may not be conventional, but it would help you, help me kind of organize my thoughts and help me share as well, and given the constraint. So
Thank you,
we'll
Prabhu.
get started. Thank you so much. नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयं मुदीरयेत् शृण्वतां स्वकतकृष्णः पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तनः हृदयन्तः स्तो हि अभद्राणि विदुनोति सुहृत्सताम् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवति उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्तिकी ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय. Okay, so today I believe we're going to be discussing the first canto, 7th chapter, verses 7, 8, and 9. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read the Sanskrit and the translation of the verses, and we will get started on the discussion, as these verses in one sense are interspersed, they are all connected, and as a consequence we will discuss the verses as a whole after reading the verses. Just I'm going to read the Sanskrit and I'm going to read the translation to begin with. This is Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.7. Yasyam vai Shruyamanayam Krishne Paramapurushe Bhaktir Utpadyate Pumsha Sokamoha Bhayapaha. Translation: simply by giving oral reception to this Vedic literature, the feeling for loving devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sprouts up at once to extinguish the fire of lamentation, illusion, and fearfulness. The next verse 1.7.8 is Sasamhitam Bhagavatim Kritvanukramya Chatmajam Sukham Adhyapayamasa Nivriti Niratam Munihi. The great sage Vyasadeva, after compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam and revising it, taught it to his own son, Sri Shukadev Goswami, who was already engaged in self-realization. And 1.7.9, Shaunako Vacha Savai Nivriti Niratah Sarvatro Pekshako Munihi Kasyava Bratim Etam Atmaramah Samobayasat. Sri Shaunaka asked Sutta Goswami, Sri Sukadev Goswami was already on the path of self-realization, and thus he was pleased with his own self. Why did he take the trouble to undergo the study of such a vast literature? So there are three verses, and we would need to begin and have an understanding which is comprehensive. So what we would do is that I would just go along and address the topics of all the three verses, and we will just refer back to the verses as and when time permits during this discussion. So the most important aspect about Srimad Bhagavatam and the delineation of Srimad Bhagavatam is for us to understand the history of Srimad Bhagavatam. The history of Srimad Bhagavatam and the speciality of Srimad Bhagavatam is elaborated by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Sandarbhas. Primarily, the Tattva Sandarbha establishes the supremacy of Srimad Bhagavatam over everything else. And from there, we come to learn that the original Veda, which is the Yajur Veda, was a compilation, or rather, originally there was one body of literature, and from the one body of literature, all the Puranas and the Itihasas were all contained within the Yajur Veda. All the Puranas and Itihasas were contained within the Yajur Veda. So Srila Vyasadeva extracted the Puranas and the Itihasas and redistributed them as he recompiled the one single body of knowledge into 4 parts. However, the number of verses of the Puranas and the Itihasas were approximately 1 billion. There was 1 billion verses. There were 1 billion verses. And of the 1 billion verses, what is found as manifest on the planet now is approximately 400,000. So out of 1 billion verses, you have 400,000. And then the sublimity or the conclusion of Srila Vyasadeva and Srila Jiva Goswami and all our acharyas is that Srimad-Bhagavatam is practically the representative of 1 billion verses of all the Puranas and Itihasas extracted from the 4 Vedas. So what is fascinating is that Srimad-Bhagavatam is practically the summary and the sublime realization of someone who compiled 1 billion verses out of realization. And he was not satisfied. And in his despondency, Sri Narad Muni, who is practically the initiator of all kinds of devotional service, appeared and gives him instruction to write the Srimad Bhagavatam. So what we are doing right now is we are actually getting involved with a topic which is a summary of 1 billion verses. And the 1 billion verses are found in the versions of the Puranas in the higher planetary systems. Yeah, the higher planetary systems, you have 1 billion verses of the Puranas. Here, what you have is a gist of 400,000 verses. And then from the 400,000 verses, you have Srimad Bhagavatam, which is considered to be the sum total and the sublime conclusion of all that has to be said in those 1 billion verses. What is also very important for us to understand is that oftentimes we hear about the Vedanta Sutra. The Vedanta Sutra, by its definition, is the conclusion of the Vedas. Veda Anta Sutra. So basically, what is the conclusion of all the knowledge that one can gain from the Vedic literature? That conclusion is being encompassed in the Vedanta Sutra. And the Vedanta Sutra has been commented upon by every prominent acharya. Yeah? Even in our own tradition, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan wrote the Govinda Bhashya, which is a commentary on the Vedanta Sutra. But what is also being commented upon by Srila Jiva Goswami is that even before the Vedanta Sutra, which is considered to be the priceless destination of all the Gyanis, yeah, you would find it being embraced very, very fully by the Vedantists, who generally belong to the Mayavadi line. They generally belong to the monist line. They basically embrace this whole concept of understanding and going deep into Vedanta. What is not known is that Srila Vyasadeva had already conceived the Srimad Bhagavatam in his heart before he compiled and put together the Vedanta Sutra. In other words, the realizations of Srimad Bhagavatam in the heart of Srila Vyasadeva became the foundational aspect of even bringing forth the Vedanta Sutra. And that is the reason why Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu practically commented that Srimad Bhagavatam is a natural commentary on all the Vedanta Sutras. We don't need anything special to be written because Srila Vyasadeva had already realized Srimad Bhagavatam in his heart. He had not manifested in terms of literature. He had not provided it to the world. And however, he had it in his heart. And these deep realizations in his heart were then presented. And he practically founded the Vedanta Sutra based on the deep realizations of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam motivated what others would consider to be the supermost aspect of the Vedas, which is the Vedanta Sutra, which is the reason why Srimad Bhagavatam is considered to be superlative. It is considered to be the conclusion, because this was conceived in the heart, and these realizations practically laid the foundation of what is to be understood from the entire body of Vedic literature. So this is the other point we need to understand when we are approaching Srimad Bhagavatam, is that this is practically the foundation for everything and anything that is ever being done, which is practically going to lead one on the path of devotional service, on the path of progress. Yeah, this is the foundation. This is exactly how it was coined by Srila Vyasadeva, the original compiler of these realizations. Now, our Srila Prabhupada constituted a three-step method. He said you got to be well-versed in the Bhagavad Gita. Being well-versed in the Bhagavad Gita would give us the ability to approach Srimad-Bhagavatam. And once we understand and assimilate Srimad-Bhagavatam in our hearts and realize Srimad-Bhagavatam, and we start experiencing Srimad-Bhagavatam. And what is the experience of Srimad-Bhagavatam? The experience of Srimad-Bhagavatam is very aptly summarized in the introductory prayers that we do every day for Bhagavatam class. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. The other verse, Shrunvatam swakata krishnaha punyashravana kirtanaha hridayantaha stohi abhadrani vidunoti suhritsatam. Abhadrani. Abhadrani is that which is highly inauspicious. Yeah. And then Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu. Badra is auspicious, abhadreshu is inauspicious. All of this is being cleared out by coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam. What is considered inauspicious? What is considered inauspicious are the modes of passion and ignorance. The contamination of the modes of passion and ignorance on the mode of goodness is considered to be the mixed mode of goodness, which is considered to be contaminated by the lower modes. So when one comes in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, then one has the ability to free themselves from the influence of the lower modes of nature, and which is the reason why Abhadrani and Nashta Prayeshu, Abhadreshu, these are all topics which basically are concerned with removing the influence of the lower modes. Now, why is it necessary for one to remove the influence of the lower modes? What is the necessity for one to be situated in the mode of goodness? The mode of goodness is not the goal of life. Just as much as being peaceful is not the goal of Krishna consciousness. Krishna Prema can be granted to one who is in economic difficulty. Krishna Prema can be granted to one who has health difficulties. Krishna Prema can be granted to one who has relationship issues. Therefore, being peaceful is not the objective of Srimad Bhagavatam, neither is it the objective of the lineage of Mahaprabhu. We would be setting a very low bar to achieve if we were to consider that I need peace and therefore I'm engaging in devotional service. That is not the objective of devotional service because it's a very low bar. Peace is obtained when one is able to transcend the modes. Transcending the modes is not the objective. However, when one comes in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam, they're coming in touch with the potency of Srimad Bhagavatam. They have the ability to clear out the lower modes of nature which cause great disturbance. And by clearing out the influence of the lower modes of nature, they position themselves to receive the ability to come in touch with sublime knowledge. So you're practically coming in touch with who we are in the service of the Lord. So there is great ability to accept Sambandha Gyan. Yeah, there is ability to accept Sambandha Gyan. So Sambandha, which is the relationship between us and Krishna, is revealed to us slowly, steadily, as we progress further in our consciousness to the higher modes of goodness. When the mode of goodness is almost unsullied, I'm using the word almost because as long as one is in this material universe, there's a possibility of small influences of passion and ignorance. So that's why it is said it is almost. Yeah. When it is almost unsullied, when the mode of goodness is predominating one's existence, then one has the ability to understand the very specific mellow of attraction they have between themselves and Krishna. They can understand what is their particular mellow of attraction. Are they attracted to the Lord as a servant? Are they attracted to the Lord as a friend? Are they attracted to the Lord as, in a parental love, where they are able to basically, serve him like Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda Maharani did in terms of Vatsalya? Are they attracted to the Lord in serving him in the capacity of serving Srimati Radharani's servants? Yeah, that is Madhurya. The point is, the information about oneself is not revealed in passion and ignorance. Nashta prayeshu abhadreshu, when we go to the higher modes, then we receive information about ourselves. We receive Sambandha Gyan. Without knowing who we are and without knowing who is Krishna, how could we engage in any kind of service? Therefore, Abhideya, which is to engage in service, has to follow Sambandha. Greater Sambandha means greater Abhideya. The greater one understands what the relationship with the Supreme, greater their ability to fall in love with Him. And the greater the ability to fall in love with Him, greater the ability to surrender. And the greater the surrender, greater the ability to serve. So there's a sequence of falling in love, surrendering, and then service. One cannot serve without surrender. One cannot surrender without love. Yeah, because in most cases, surrender is misunderstood as being accepting the Lord in the position where we are all completely overwhelmed with our lives, and as a consequence, we accept, Krishna. But yet we don't trust Him. Why don't we trust Him? It's because we don't love Him. That's why love is required as a prerequisite for us to be able to properly surrender. And by properly surrendering, then we have the ability to serve. So there has to be prema, which is accompanied with surrender, and then there is service. So sambandha, which is understanding who we are in relationship with the Lord, is progressed on with at different stages. And as we progress further in understanding our relationship, greater would be our ability to serve Him, because greater would be the ability to love Him. Greater would be our ability to position ourselves in such a way that He can use us in His service. And then greater would be the ability to serve Him. Now, in that context, Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu is achieved by coming in touch with Srimad-Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada, as we began our conversation earlier, Srila Prabhupada constituted a study of the Bhagavad Gita because Krishna tells us how to approach Him. And when He says how to approach Him, we have to realize in Kali Yuga, the Lord departed. He conducted His unmanifest pastimes before the writing of Srimad-Bhagavatam, before the compiling of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and left behind Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is a personification of Krishna Himself. So how could you approach Krishna? How do we approach Srimad-Bhagavatam without understanding what He wanted us to do? And that comes from the Bhagavad Gita. So understanding the Bhagavad Gita is a prerequisite for us to approach the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Srimad-Bhagavatam is considered to be what we would call the personification of Krishna because it's non-different. It is completely non-different. He departed. He became unmanifest. His pastimes are still occurring in Vrindavan, but He became unmanifest. People couldn't see Him with their vision as they did 5,000 years back. But what did He give them? He gave them Srimad-Bhagavatam. Srimad-Bhagavatam is the personification of the Supreme Lord. Now, one needs to understand how to approach Him. How do you approach Srimad-Bhagavatam? That is to be understood from the Bhagavad Gita. Once you know how to approach Him, and then you are serving Srimad-Bhagavatam through oral reception, which is to receive it in disciplic succession, and I'll explain that to you in a bit, then one has the ability to live the Srimad-Bhagavatam because Srimad-Bhagavatam touches Krishna so powerfully. And the transformation that occurs allows one to experience what is experienced by the devotees of Chaitanya Charitamrita. So that's why Chaitanya Charitamrita is considered postgraduate study, because of the fact that one needs to live Srimad-Bhagavatam, then they can understand what it is to experience Srimad-Bhagavatam in living. Then one can understand what is the emotion and the sentiments of the devotees who are participating in Gaur Leela, which is elaborated by Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So this is basically the sequence. The sequence is Bhagavad Gita, then it's Srimad-Bhagavatam, and then there is Chaitanya Charitamrita. So there are 3 different steps. Yeah. But then even today, what we will do is we will key out, or rather pick the Srimad Bhagavad Gita verses that we could pick for us to be able to understand this verse and the following 2 verses. And then I will also give you a few other examples, or rather, a few other aspects of how we can understand the verses we are about to discuss. Now, here in this verse, it is said simply by giving oral reception to the Vedic literature, 1.7.7, the feeling for loving devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, sprouts up at once to extinguish the fire of lamentation, illusion, and fearfulness. But oral reception is being recommended, and this was structured. If you notice, Srila Sukadev Goswami received the Srimad-Bhagavatam through oral reception. His father, Srila Vyasadeva, received the gist of the Srimad-Bhagavatam through the mercy of Sri Narad Muni. His father, Srila Vyasadeva, realized Srimad-Bhagavatam. And what is the meaning of realizing Srimad-Bhagavatam? Srila Vyasadeva literally saw the Srimad-Bhagavatam unfold in his heart. He could see the different Purusha avatars, which are the topic of Srimad Bhagavatam. He could see the universes coming out of the pores of the skin of Karanodakashayi Vishnu. He could see the Lord lying on the Garbhodaka ocean with the planetary systems being arranged on from the cord that develops from his navel, and Lord Brahma sitting on top of that particular navel, the cord that appears, and Lord Brahma is sitting there and he is engaging in the process of meditation and creation. He could see the pastimes of the Lord in his different leelas. He could completely understand what occurred by direct perception. This is called pratyaksha. Pratyaksha praman means being able to see things directly. Now, when a person sees things directly, when they see things directly, they have the ability to convey the message in a very clear way. And let's go to the Bhagavad Gita now and see what Krishna wants us to do to understand him, which is Srimad Bhagavatam. Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna personified. Now let's go to the Bhagavad Gita to see how Krishna wants us to approach him. What is the process? So we are going to 4.9, which is Janma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Yo Vetti Tatvatah Tektva Deham Punarjanma Naitimam Eti So Arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So here, there's a very clear mention of the word tattvataha. Tattvataha means that one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities. He is talking about understanding Krishna by an absolute platform, in the absolute consideration. There are relative considerations. The relative considerations are, you could basically say that someone basically could say that the universe basically is being controlled. And as a consequence, there must be someone who is a supreme controller. And so there are many other versions of how things are being done. So these are relative considerations that people come up with. Relative considerations do not fall in the category of sat. Sat means truth, and that which it doesn't, that which doesn't change, which remains steady, and that is the reason why it is called sat. It also has the meaning of eternal. So first and foremost, there has to be an absolute consideration. An absolute consideration is not relative. People can't have opinions. They can't really have different considerations based on what they think and their perception. There is an absolute consideration. What is an absolute consideration? If I were to come on video in front of you and you see me and I see you, these are absolute perceptions. This is pratyaksha. You are seeing me, so I can't really say that there's something else which is going on. Yeah. So we have to be very clear that absolute consideration means having direct perception. Absolute considerations means there is no relative consideration. There is no relative consideration based on what is true and what isn't. Yeah. So first and foremost, what we need to understand is that in this verse, when Krishna says the fundamental aspect of knowing him, his transcendental nature, has to come through tattva, which is basically the what we would call as knowing him in the absolute consideration. We have to understand that it is due to direct perception. Srila Vyasadeva saw him. Yeah, he saw him. He saw all the leelas. He saw all the pastimes. He saw all the expansions. He saw the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. He had a vision of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam, and then he spoke that vision. Now, oral reception, as we spoke earlier, is the method that's being used. Shri Narad Muni passing on the empowerment to Srila Vyasadeva. Srila Vyasadeva, who is an incarnation of the Lord himself, and it is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Unless he was an incarnation of the Lord, he couldn't have had these realizations, because these are very confidential aspects of the Lord's existence in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's no way anybody could have an access to this unless he was empowered, or rather, he was the Lord himself. So this is basically what's being spoken of in the Srimad Bhagavatam as well, that the Srimad Bhagavatam basically is a personification of the Lord as conceived by Srila Vyasadeva, because he actually saw the Lord. So this is the first point. Now in this verse, he says, Yo, yevam yo vetti tattvataha. Tattvataha is the word that's being used. So please do remember the word tattvataha. Tattvataha means absolute consideration. Now let's go on and see how one could come in touch with the Lord in absolute consideration. And that is being explained by the Lord in the same chapter to Arjuna in 4.34. Yeah, let's go to 4.34. 4.34 is the very famous verse. Here, you will again see the word tattvataha coming up. Tadviddi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. Now, pay attention to the last two verses. Pay attention to the last two verses, last word here. Here it says Tattva Darshinaha. So Krishna in 4.9 is wanting us to approach him through Tattva, which is the absolute consideration. In 4.34, he is saying, approach someone who has had darshan of Tattva. Here the word used is darshan. Perhaps there's someone is not muted. Could someone just ensure that they're all muted, please? Thank you. So in 4.34, we have the mention of the word tattva, which is absolute consideration. But here he says tattva darshan. So whoever has seen the truth, they have the ability to pass the truth on to others. And this is done through oral reception. Whoever has seen the truth can pass the truth on to others through oral reception. That is being spoken of here. But then Krishna is adding a few more things. What does he say? He says, Tadviddi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninaha tattvadarshinah. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. Please pay attention to these two words. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. Now let's come back and understand this particular verse 1.7.7, keeping in mind 4.9 and 4.34 of the Bhagavad Gita. 4.9, Krishna is telling us, approach me through tattva, which means you should learn about me through absolute consideration, which means that whoever has seen me should be able to give you information about me. They should have had an experience which is direct. There cannot be relative experiences which can be taken here. It has to be direct. It has to be absolute consideration. They're not relative consideration. Then 4.34, he says, go serve that particular person. Serve the person, serve the devotee, and render menial service, render submissive service, render seva, and then inquire submissively. Because that person has had tattva darshan, he has seen the truth, and he would be able to pass it on to you. So this whole culture of oral reception is being mentioned here as key for us to be able to approach Srimad-Bhagavatam. Oral reception essentially is as follows. Yeah. Shraddha, faith, is passed on through sound vibration. Srila Vyasadeva saw the Lord and he practically developed deeper assimilation of realizations. He passed on this information to his son Srila Sukadeva Goswami through sound vibration. And the sound vibration of Srila Vyasadeva contained his realizations and his faith. And what is faith? Faith is required when you do not know if something exists or doesn't exist. Say for someone, if someone has to find out if there's an object behind a door and that door is closed, it requires faith. You need to be able to hear someone say, yes, there is something behind the door, but then one can't see it. That's why it requires faith. But then in Srila Vyasadeva's case, he had direct knowledge. He had direct experiences. There was absolute consideration. He literally saw the Srimad-Bhagavatam unfold. And Krishna uses the word tattva darshan in 4.34 of the Bhagavad Gita, saying, approach one who has had a direct experience of the Leela of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is being instructed here in that particular verse. So Srila Sukadeva Goswami received the direct experiences of Srila Vyasadeva into his heart through oral reception. The sound vibration of Srila Vyasadeva contained the extent of faith of Srila Vyasadeva. That sound vibration of faith of Srila Vyasadeva, Shraddha, goes into the heart of Srila Sukadeva Goswami through oral reception. It establishes itself in Srila Sukadeva Goswami's heart, and he realizes the knowledge that was given by the original speaker, Srila Vyasadeva. Now, Srila Sukadev Goswami, he is having direct experiences because he is an extraordinarily qualified vessel which can contain the nectar of Srimad Bhagavatam as spoken by Srila Vyasadeva. This nectar is being experienced in the heart of Srila Sukadev Goswami. As he is experiencing the nectar of Srimad Bhagavatam in his heart, the Bhagavatam becomes sweeter. It becomes sweeter and sweeter as Srila Sukadev Goswami develops deeper realizations of Srimad Bhagavatam. And then Srila Sukadev Goswami speaks in the assembly before Parikshit Maharaj. What does he do? Again, there is oral reception. Sound vibration is spoken. And this sound vibration is heard by Parikshit Maharaj. But then the Srimad Bhagavatam and Srila Jiva Goswami, they also write that in that assembly, there was Vyasadeva and there was Srila Narad Muni. There were great sages from the other planetary systems, the realized souls. Everybody had assembled to hear from Srila Sukadev Goswami in that particular original assembly. Srila Sukadev Goswami was giving oral reception first to Srila Vyasadeva. Srimad Bhagavatam became completely sweetened in his heart. He assimilated Srimad Bhagavatam. Then he shared his realizations. Sri Narad Muni and Sri Vyasadeva, they were sitting in audience hearing Srila Sukadev Goswami, and they developed an extraordinary feeling of gratitude of being in that assembly because Srila Sukadev Goswami's realizations of after hearing Srila Vyasadeva were so wonderful that it practically made the original speakers, both Sri Narad Muni and Srila Vyasadeva, very happy. All of this is accomplished through oral reception. Oral reception basically is sound vibration that enters into the ears and establishes itself in the heart of the devotee. The faith of the speaker contains his sambandha with Krishna. There is sambandha gyan in the faith of the speaker. The speaker has realized Krishna, and that realization is captured in the sound vibration of the speaker. And that sound vibration, when it enters into our heart, has the ability to give us sambandha. Krishna Sambandha, which is the connection with Krishna, is received from one particular person to other in the disciplic succession, in the manner of them being able to share faith. Their own faith and their direct experiences of service to the Lord is their Sambandha, their connection with Krishna, which is their own particular personal relationship. When they speak, they're carrying that personal relationship through sound vibration. When it enters into our hearts, then that particular sound vibration, which carries the faith of the speaker, has the ability to establish faith in our hearts. So sound vibration particularly is being mentioned as the mode of communication in this particular yuga. And that is the reason why right at the onset of Kali Yuga, you had this particular exchange between Srila Sukadev Goswami and Parikshit Maharaj, as a consequence, wanting to establish that the idea of Srimad Bhagavatam should be shared through oral reception. It should be shared by a speaker who has pratyaksha praman, someone who has had tattva darshan, someone who has seen the entire pastime of the Lord in absolute consideration, and they are taking that particular sambandha, that realization, that direct experience, and when they speak, faith is carried from their heart onto the hearts of the listeners, which is what happened when Srila Sukadev Goswami actually assimilated Srimad Bhagavatam, and he was speaking in the assembly. Srila Vyasadeva was also present, and Sri Narad Muni was also present. In the same assembly, you had Sutta Goswami. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is being passed on from Srila Sukadev Goswami to Srila Sutta Goswami. Sutta Goswami then comes to Naimisharanya, much after the speaking of Srimad Bhagavatam by Srila Sukadev Goswami. He comes and he sits down and he recites in Naimisharanya. There's great deliberation by the sages. There are different transcendentalists who are all gathered. They're all very sincere souls. They have no duplicity in their heart. They're very eager for them to be able to understand how to move forward. And as a consequence, they're constantly seeking sadhu sangha. They're constantly seeking the sangha of those who have realized and who are able to speak. So they all gathered. What is wonderful is that the gathering was quite large. They had no microphone back then. But then the hearts of those who were particularly sitting there were so powerful, and the quality of faith and the quality of the sound vibration of Sutta Goswami was so intense that even without a microphone, that particular oral reception was given to the larger assembly in Naimisharanya. In that assembly, you have Shaunaka Rishi. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is a whole group of nested conversation from conversation, but the original speaker was Srila Vyasadeva, and it was received by Srila Sukadeva Goswami. And then after Sukadeva Goswami had tasted the fruit of Srimad Bhagavatam, and then after he had practically assimilated, his realizations are what is being spread by the other speakers from one assembly to the other. So this is how wonderfully faith is being passed on. And this is exactly the parampara system. The parampara system, when we take diksha, when we take initiation in any parampara, we are actually positioning ourselves to receive faith. This is what we are doing. Ado Shraddha, Tata Sadhu Sangaha. Yeah. Then you do Bhajana Kriya. Then you do Anartha Nivarti. The point is that you position yourself to receive faith. The positioning of receiving faith requires just one objective. The only one objective which a sadhaka has, the only one objective which a devotee in this movement has, is to position themselves to receive faith. How do you position yourself to receive faith? That is being spoken in 4.34, where he says, Pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya, because Bhakti Devi and the faith of the speaker is basically in the heart of the speaker. Bhakti Devi is not managed by the Lord. Bhakti Devi is independent. She is in the heart of the devotee who has tasted the fruit of Srimad Bhagavatam, who has realized Srimad Bhagavatam. When that person is served, then that person becomes very, I would say, merciful. So, Bhakti is in the heart of the devotees of the Lord. Krishna doesn't manage that. It is managed by the devotees of the Lord. That's why he says, go and serve. Pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. So positioning oneself to receive faith is the only objective for this particular movement. All we are doing with sadhana bhakti is constantly positioning ourselves so that we could receive this faith. And that is done through seva of those who are realized. So the positioning is basically such that we are constantly trying to ensure that we are having this understanding that we on our own have no qualification. We have no qualification. Our business is to find one who is qualified and to serve them. And then by coming in touch with the parampara system, it gives us an opportunity to engage in pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. And by engaging in such seva, the heart of those who has received the sound vibration starting from Srila Vyasadeva will be passed on to us in the form of instructions, in the form of coming in touch with them through different types of seva. They become pleased, and that particular bhakti transfers from their heart into our heart. It's an automatic, organic process. The endeavor that we have to do is to have the understanding that we have to position ourselves for Kripa. Because we are Kripa Siddhas. What is our qualification anyways? We have no other qualification other than wanting to position ourselves for deeper mercy. How do you position yourself for mercy? You position yourself for mercy constantly by chanting. And as a consequence, Harinam Seva, when we engage in the chanting of Harinam, and when we engage in the chanting of Harinam, it brings about great humility. And as humility comes forth, then it positions ourselves to be used by the Lord. So this is basically how the parampara system passes information on, because the sound vibration contains the sambandha gyan of the speaker. So from one particular guru to the other, the oral reception of one guru to the other, we are receiving this particular sound vibration, and we have the ability to move forward. Yeah. So this is basically how it moves forward. This is basically the fundamental truth of this particular verse, is that sound vibration, oral reception is very important because faith gets passed on through that sound vibration. Now, how much time do we have? It's already, I guess, 45 minutes. Are we? How am I for time? I'm sorry if I've overshot what you planned.
I think, Prabhu, we have time till 8:45 for you.
And how much? How much? Because I'm. Can you give me how much? How many minutes?
It's around, let's say, 18 minutes.
18 minutes. Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. Okay, thank you. Because I couldn't translate what it was in Indian time, so I was struggling. Thank you. So that's fine. So we are going on to the next verse. This next verse is the foundation of what is being taught to us in our parampara. It is the foundation of the realization of Srila Rupa Goswami. We have to understand that every type of literature, every piece of literature that's been coming through from the Goswamis of Vrindavan have their foundation in Srimad Bhagavatam. Our Srila Prabhupada took the realizations of Srila Jiva Goswami from his Sandarbhas. He took the realizations and the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur on the Srimad-Bhagavatam, and he assembled his Srimad-Bhagavatam writing, purports, translations, keeping all that into consideration. So practically everything that's been offered to us comes from Srimad-Bhagavatam, literally everything. Now, this particular verse has a lot to do with understanding Srila Rupa Goswami's fundamental instruction to the followers of Lord Chaitanya, that is given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Anya bilashita shunyam jnana karmadi anavritam anukulena krishna anusirnam bhakti uttama. Yeah. Basically, uttama bhakti requires the qualification of anya bilashita shunyam. There cannot be any other objective other than wanting to serve the Lord. There cannot be any other objective. Then you have two other qualities that are being spoken of. Jnana karmadi anavritam. Jnana karmadi anavritam. Basically, jnana and karma, these cannot be the objectives either when we are pursuing uttama bhakti. The effect of jnana and karma, or rather motivations for jnana and karma, have to be dissolved progressively. Now let's understand the word jnana. What is jnana? In the context of Srila Rupa Goswami's verse, Anyabilashita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavritam, what is he talking about when he talks about jnana? Jnana is translated to knowledge, but what is knowledge? Knowledge basically is superior to activity in this world, is what the fundamental precept is. The karmis, they have discovered that their situation, their lot can be improved. They have discovered that there are better bodies that can be made available in the universe. They have better bodies in different planetary systems. They have the ability to manipulate material nature and produce effects of material nature in such a way that they have a better quality of life whilst being on the planet. And they also have the ability to resolve issues in one way or the other. So this is basically the objective of a karmi when he engages in devotional service. So you can find that you can build a temple for Sri Sri Radha and Krishna, and you can have people come to the temple with different aspirations. Some will come with the aspiration of wanting to resolve issues of life, which is basically the karmis. Krishna does not discourage this at all. In 7.24 of the Bhagavad Gita, he's very clear. Yeah, he says very clearly that the idea of coming to me, there are different gradations of people, and as a consequence, one can't really say that they should only come if they want to render pure devotional service. Some could come because they are in distress, they're seekers of wealth. Some could come basically who are what we would call as the seekers of knowledge. Some would come because they're wanting to, end their suffering. So he's giving different gradations. So that's verse 7.16. Sorry, I used 7.24, but it is actually 7.16. So in 7.16, Krishna does make it very clear that he is accepting these different categories of devotees who come to him and receive help and ask for help. There's no problem with that. However, Srila Rupa Goswami is making it very clear that Anya Bilashita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavritam. He says, Karma Kanda cannot be the objective in pure devotional service. It is not the objective of the movement of Lord Chaitanya. Achieving objectives to improve a lot in this world is not the objective of the movement of Lord Chaitanya. This is being defined by Srila Rupa Goswami. The other point is Gyana. The Gyani is superior to the Karmi. The Gyani is superior to the Karmi, and the Gyani basically has rejected any kind of progress within the sphere of material creation. He says, I don't care. I don't really care about what's in this material creation because it's only trouble regardless of whether it's in the lower planetary systems, it is in the middle planetary system, or it's in the higher planetary system. All we're asking for is just trouble. Yeah. So basically, there's just plain trouble. So the Gyani is superior to the Karmi because he realizes that all these adjustments within this particular material universe are nothing but a waste of time. He realizes that. However, what is the objective of the Gyani? The objective of the Gyani is, because he has realized that this world is nothing but trouble, the Gyani wants out. He's practically saying, I want out. I do not want to be a part of this universe. Sorry, the creation, the material creation. I want to transcend material creation. At first glance, it may appear to be a wonderful ideal, and it may be difficult for us to understand what could be wrong with such an ideal. In reality, Srila Rupa Goswami is saying that if you want to enjoy life in the material universe, or once you have understood that this enjoyment is of no use, if you want to leave the material universe, neither of these can be objectives for devotional service. Gyana karmadi anavritam. The Srimad Bhagavatam practically rejects both karma kanda and jnana kanda. Srimad Bhagavatam does not accept either karma kanda or jnana kanda. And throughout Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll have many, many, many examples of devotees who are either karmis or who are jnanis, and they achieve their objectives. But this is merely given for us to understand that this is basically, there's a differential in how to approach the Lord. Yeah. What is wrong with karma and karma kanda? The Lord is worshipped, but the objective of what the Lord can give the karmi is much bigger than the Lord himself. So there can be deity worship, but the deity worship itself would be for the purpose of achieving something else. Yeah, you see that in Srimad Bhagavatam as well. They give you that example. Yeah, you can read it in the 6th canto, where the Prajapati is worshipping the Supreme Lord. The Lord appears with, the 10 different arms, and he is granting the desires of the Prajapati. And once the desires are granted, the Lord disappears. So the sambandha of the Prajapati who worships Krishna to achieve certain things is over after he achieves the objective. So the objective of achieving things seems to be much, much bigger than Krishna and Radharani herself. So you can have karmis come into our temples and worship the deity of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna to achieve objectives in their life, but Srila Rupa Goswami is rejecting it, because once their objectives are realized, they stop coming. Yeah, Krishna disappears. Their only sambandha, only connection with Krishna is to achieve some objective. It doesn't mean that their faith doesn't develop. It simply means that their objective is a very low bar. It's a very, very low bar for a process that is extraordinarily powerful. Now comes the Gyani. You'd be surprised to know that the Gyanis worship Krishna as well, and they worship the deities of Shri Shri Radha and Krishna, but their objective is to purify themselves. It is not service. They simply think that, I must worship this divine couple, I must give them different offerings. By doing so, I will purify myself. By purifying myself from the objectives, or rather the influence of the modes of nature, I will transcend the modes of nature. That is their objective. So once their senses become purified, once their consciousness goes higher, even though they are worshipping the deities, they're doing so with the objective of moksha, which is to transcend. They achieve that objective, and then the sambandha is over. That's why Srila Rupa Goswami is very clear. He says, Gyana karmadi anavritam. And that is the objective of Srimad Bhagavatam. This particular prayer of Srila Rupa Goswami defines the subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam. Anyabilata shunyam gyana karmadi anavritam. Anukulena Krishna Anushiranam Bhakti Uttama. Uttama Bhakti cannot have the objectives of Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. Because Karma Kanda, once the objective is received, the person walks away. Jnana Kanda, once the objective is received, the person walks away. So neither of these can be any objective for the actual readers of Srimad Bhagavatam. Why are we saying this? There are so many versions of Srimad Bhagavatam. There are so many commentaries that have been written on the Srimad Bhagavatam by the Advaitins that it distorts the original intention of Srila Vyasadeva. Srila Rupa Goswami is correcting that original intention of Srila Vyasadeva. He's bringing forth that particular original intention in a wonderful way. Sorry, not correcting. He's bringing forth, highlighting, enhancing the original intention. The original intention of writing Srimad Bhagavatam was to present a body of literature that does not have or is not contaminated by the objectives of Karma Kanda or by the objectives of Jnana Kanda, but it is sublime in being able to establish sambandha with Krishna himself. So the objective of Srimad Bhagavatam is that Srimad Bhagavatam is Krishna himself. We are going to develop deeper sambandha with Krishna himself, and that's the only objective. Deeper sambandha would allow us to serve him very nicely, which is the greater objective. That is the whole idea. The whole idea of Srimad Bhagavatam is to give us sambandha gyan, so that we become much, much better servants than whom we are, is to help us surrender so that we could be proper servants. Because proper service can't really come without surrender, and surrender cannot exist without love. Yeah. One cannot really surrender unless one is in love, which means you position yourself and you can be able to tell Krishna, Krishna, do whatever you please with me. Please engage me in your service. Yeah. The idea of being able to go and tell Krishna this requires love. And without love, one can't really make that statement. So it's very important for us to realize that Anya Bilashita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anavritam is practically a definition of what Srimad-Bhagavatam has to offer, which is sublime and which has nothing to do with Jnana Kanda and Karma Kanda, which is the subject matter of all the other Vedic literature. Here in Srimad-Bhagavatam, it is unsullied. It is completely unsullied. Yeah, it's pure. The objective is Krishna Sambandha, it's Krishna Prema. And as a consequence, if there is any group of devotees who particularly are preparing to come in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam in a wonderful way, they are the followers of Lord Chaitanya. It is the birthright of the followers of Lord Chaitanya, because we have a singular objective in this movement of wanting to engage in the service of the divine couple. And we chant and we come in touch with the Lord so that we could become proper servants, so that we could serve the Lordships. This is our objective, and we are aligned with that objective of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are extraordinarily closely aligned. So Srimad Bhagavatam has been written, compiled, and presented for the chanter of Harinam. It has been written for those who are chanting Harinam. The deeper the realizations of chanting Harinam, the deeper you come in touch with your chanting, greater would be the revelations of Srimad Bhagavatam, because they're completely aligned. The objectives are aligned. The Lord and his name are non-different. Nama naminoho abhinnatvam. Similarly, Srimad Bhagavatam is non-different from Krishna. So as one prepares to approach Krishna, who is Srimad Bhagavatam, he is being helped by Harinam, who is very merciful. Harinam is Krishna personified in Nam, and then there is Srimad Bhagavatam, who is Krishna personified in terms of his Leela, in terms of the literature itself. It is very dynamic. It is dynamic in the sense that the deeper one progresses in their Harinam chanting, greater would be their ability to understand Srimad Bhagavatam. And the deeper they release Srimad Bhagavatam, greater would be their ability to chant Harinam. So it's very reciprocal. It's an extraordinarily reciprocal arrangement. So the point being here, in this verse 1.7.8, the great sage Vyasadeva, after compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam and revising it, taught it to his own son, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, who was already engaged in self-realization. So the question then becomes, if one is already engaged in self-realization, what is the purpose of teaching Bhagavatam? The purpose of teaching Bhagavatam is because this particular topic of Srimad Bhagavatam is superlative and it transcends the objectives of the karmis and the gyanis. Jnana Kanda is what Srila Sukadeva Goswami was engaging in. He was transcending and becoming self-realized, and he was transcending the material universes. He was transcending the three modes of material nature. Yeah. But that particular objective is very minimal compared to the objective of Srimad Bhagavatam. As a consequence, Srimad Bhagavatam was fully appreciable even for those who are completely self-realized. Completely self-realized means one who is not influenced by the modes of nature, who has transcended the modes of nature, whose particular consciousness is unsullied by the lower modes of passion and ignorance. But what is missing in this Brahma Bhota Prasannatma na Sochati na Kanchati? What is missing in this particular consciousness of becoming unsullied by the modes of nature? You see, the whole objective of Jnana Kanda, of transcending three modes of nature, is achieved when one crosses over into Namabhas. Offensive chanting is Namaprad, and when one's chanting becomes offenseless, they're already in the position of being liberated. So with offenseless chanting, one is able to achieve what the Gyanis would want to achieve after many, many austerities. Then why would we want to consider offenseless chanting as being the objective of Krishna consciousness? The chanting that is done by the realized souls is just not offenseless. It has complete Sambandha Gyan. It is Shuddhanam. They have come in touch with the Krishna name in such a way that every time they chant the name Krishna, Shri Shri Radha and Shyam Sundar, they appear in their heart and they engage in service in prema. So this is Shuddhanam. What we are seeking is service. What we are seeking is sambandha. What we are seeking is the ability to connect with the divine couple through our service. And that particular objective is achieved through Harinam, which is Krishna himself, and through Srimad-Bhagavatam. So the lower objective of relieving ourselves of material pangs by transcending the modes of material nature is not the objective of Srimad-Bhagavatam. It is not the objective of Harinam either. The objective of Harinam and Srimad-Bhagavatam is to give us sambandha. Yeah? It is literally Srimad-Bhagavatam takes our hand and places our hand on Krishna's hand. It literally connects us to Krishna in service. So that's the objective, so that we could serve. It is not the objective of just being relieved of material distress or being away from this particular existence in terms of relieving oneself. As a consequence, even for one who is liberated from the three modes of material nature, they still need Krishna Sambandha. Liberation from the modes of nature doesn't mean Krishna Sambandha is going to come. That's why they need to come in touch with Harinam. That's why they need to come in touch with Bhagavatam. As they come in touch with Harinam and Srimad Bhagavatam, even if they are above the modes of nature, then they develop Sambandha Gyan quite easily. They develop what the relationship is with the Supreme Lord. So being above the modes of nature doesn't mean one knows the relationship with Krishna. For knowing the relationship with Krishna, one needs to come in touch with those who have a relationship with Krishna. How can you just come in touch with Krishna without the help of those who already have the relationship with Krishna? So that's the objective of Srimad Bhagavatam. We are coming in touch with great personalities who already have a connection with Krishna. And as a consequence, that particular inspiration would come into our hearts and would give us sambandha. Our objective is to develop a deeper understanding of our relationship so that we could serve. This is the whole objective. And as a consequence, what is being said here is that you could be an Atmaram, which means you're completely self-realized and you're blissful because you're not influenced by the lower modes of nature. You're above the three modes of nature. But being an Atmaram who is completely self-realized doesn't mean you have Krishna Sambandha. So Srila Vyasadeva gave his son Krishna Sambandha. He gave him Krishna Sambandha by giving him Srimad Bhagavatam. And his son, even though he was liberated, he became ecstatic on receiving Krishna Sambandha because he is originally the servant of Srimati Radharani. So he is again rekindling his original relationship through his father, who is giving him deeper realizations. Yeah. So this particular idea of coming in touch with Srimad Bhagavatam is above the objective of simply leaving the material existence. It is not. It is much higher. It is practically to receive Krishna Sambandha. And Krishna Sambandha is given to everyone through those who already have Sambandha. How can we distribute things that we don't have? Yeah, that's falsehood. How can you give something which you don't have in your heart? It's not possible. You need to be able to only give things that are in the heart, because that's basically the truth. That's how it works. And this is basically what's being done here. Now, this is Srila Sukadeva Goswami, who is a personal servant of Srimati Radharani and Krishna. He is speaking Srimad Bhagavatam. Coming in touch with this automatically brings us very close to the service of the divine couple. That is what is being spoken of here in 1.7.8, saying the great sage Vyasadeva, after compiling the Srimad Bhagavatam and revising it, taught it to his own son, Srila Sukadeva Goswami, who was already engaged in self-realization. So he gave him something far beyond what he had already achieved. Because liberation is a very low bar for the movement of Lord Chaitanya. Yeah, it's a very low bar. 1.7.9, Sri Shaunaka asked Sutta Goswami, Sri Sukadeva Goswami was already on the path of self-realization, and thus he was pleased with his own self. Why did he take the trouble to undergo the study of such a vast literature? This was what was covered by me for the last 15 minutes. Yeah, I was covering the fact that there is one thing to be above material nature and to be transcending and to be liberated. It is another to have Krishna Sambandha. Notice this, that during Gaur Leela, it was Mahavishnu, Srila Advaita Acharya, who felt unqualified to distribute Harinam. He wanted Mahaprabhu to descend. Even Mahavishnu is very eager to taste Krishna Sambandha coming through the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Advaita Acharya, who is an incarnation of Mahavishnu, He was actually praying to Lord Chaitanya to descend. What was the necessity for Mahavishnu to pray to Lord Chaitanya to descend? Sri Mahavishnu could give liberation very easily. He could take one higher beyond the material sky. He could grant liberation to anyone, but he could not grant Krishna Prema. As a consequence, Krishna Prema had to come from those who already had it. Who has the maximum Krishna Prema? There's only one individual who has maximum Krishna Prema. If there is anything such as maximum, if you can define it, that is Srimati Radharani. When Krishna descends with Krishna Prema in the mood of Srimati Radharani, that is Gauravatar. That is Lord Gauranga. So Lord Gauranga carries the fullest extent of Krishna Prema ever conceivable because he is in the mood of Srimati Radharani. He is carrying the compassion of the Divine Mother. He is carrying Srimati Radharani's emotions in his heart. That is Lord Gauranga. And that is why even Sri Advaita Acharya could not really start the mission of Lord Gauranga. He had to wait for him to come because Lord Gauranga was Srimati Radharani herself. Lord Gauranga was Srimati Radharani herself. In other words, the Srimati Radharani, it was Krishna in the mood of Srimati Radharani. As a consequence, who could have the ability to distribute Krishna Prema? Only she could distribute Krishna Prema. That is why Srimati Radharani is so important for us in our Sangha and in terms of understanding. When you come to Vrindavan, everything is Radharani, everything, literally. And she is so important because of the fact that it is her compassion that we have seen manifest for 500 years to Lord Chaitanya. It is her compassion that has seen us, brought us to Krishna consciousness. It was her compassion which brought Srila Prabhupada to the West because he came in the line of Lord Chaitanya. So this is not an ordinary circumstance. Now you have Srimati Radharani's personal servant, Srila Sukadev Goswami, speaking Srimad-Bhagavatam. What is he going to do? Is he just going to grant liberation? No, that's such a low bar. Is he going to grant material manipulation and riches and so on and so forth to receive material, what we would call as relief? No. He is going to give Krishna Sambandha because in his heart, he has Srimati Radharani's grace. In his heart, he has the Sambandha given by Srimati Radharani herself because he was a personal servant. And this is being spoken of in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita by Srila Sanatana Goswami, not necessarily in Srimad Bhagavatam. In Srimad Bhagavatam, the literature itself is consumed by a vast majority. It's not relegated to any particular group. As a consequence, it's more general. But the Brihad Bhagavatamrita has a lot for us, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, as it was compiled by Srila Sanatana Goswami. I think I'm going to stop here. Then I can leave a few minutes for questions if there are any. So we went through the 3 verses. I'm just going to kind of summarize in 2 minutes. We went through these 3 verses, and the foundation of these 3 verses is also in the Bhagavad Gita in 4.9 and 4.34. The setting of the stage of oral reception, which we saw in 7.7, is to indicate the fact that in Kali Yuga, faith has to be received from those who already have faith. And our Prabhupada basically arranged for Srimad-Bhagavatam classes with the purpose so that the speakers could pay attention, surrender, step aside, so that Krishna could use them to give faith to others. Yeah? So this is basically the topic. But then we also went into 7.8 and 7.9 about the nature of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is that the objective of Srimad-Bhagavatam is to give Sambandha, Krishna Sambandha, and it can only be given by those who already have it. And as a consequence, we in the line of Lord Chaitanya are literally qualified to go deeper into Srimad-Bhagavatam because our mainstay is the chanting of Harinam. As we chant Harinam to serve Nama, we also qualify ourselves to understand Srimad-Bhagavatam because it's been compiled and written for the purpose of those whose only objective is developing deeper Sambandha so that there could be deeper Abhideya, and then we could ultimately achieve the results, which is Prema himself, Krishna Prema. So I'm going to stop here and see if you have any questions. I think, let me see. Okay, should I just go to chat and perhaps?
Yes, Prabhu. I think Pradyumna Prabhu has a question. He's the president of Leicester Temple.
Of course, yeah, Hare Krishna, Pradyumna Prabhu. Wonderful to hear from you. I'm just going to read out the question. This is from Pradyumna Prabhu. Your connection to 4.9 and 4.34 stood out for me. In terms of modes of nature, devotional service can be practiced in any mode, yet mode of goodness situates us for greater realization and transition into pure goodness. So what does it take to become fixed in the mode of goodness so one does not drop to lower modes? Thank you. So it's a wonderful question. And I think this is basically the challenge that we face in our movement. In our movement, we face a challenge because we are all engaged in activities outside of the practice of devotional service while we engage in our professions, etc., which practically puts us in touch with the lower modes of nature. And then we come back home and we reverse our position and do a few hours of sadhana. And then we go back out there and then we get exposed to the lower modes of nature. So the idea of transitioning and being situated in the higher mode of goodness is a difficult proposition. However, just as much as one requires, a certain system for us to get into, one also needs to strategize to be situated in the mode of goodness. I use the word saying you have to strategize to be situated in the mode of goodness. And strategy, by its very word, means long-term planning. There has to be some long-term planning, taking into account and being cognizant of the fact that one cannot constantly engage in the flip-flop of being deeply immersed in passion and ignorance and then coming back for a surface and then taking a few gasps of pure goodness or transcendence and then going back again and diving deeply into passion and ignorance. This flip-flop of 180-degree turns on a daily basis over a long period of time doesn't help, but it helps in terms of making steady progress, but in very small quantities. What is important is for devotees to realize that they are in the situation of where they are, which is wonderful because they are devotees, because of their thoughts and their desires that have occurred in the past, sometimes in the past lifetime, sometimes in the past 20 years. Who we are today is what we thought we wanted to be 20 years back. Unfortunately, for most of us, we were not thinking of pure goodness 20 years back. And as a consequence, our life has become so complicated that we have to fit Krishna in. Now, the point is, how do you reverse this? The reversal is also very simple. We strategize and have a long-term objective of more absorbed full-time service in the long run. And as a consequence, from now on, we contribute and we do what is required from a practical basis for the family. But for the long run, we aspire to be fully engaged in the service of the Lord. And as we aspire every day for long-term full service, more absorption, a greater level of time completely in engagement in service, greater would be the opportunity created by Krishna. So the idea is we desired our way into the present circumstances. And then we wanted Krishna to fit into the present circumstances. And sometimes he fits in wonderfully, sometimes he doesn't. And it causes a lot of anguish, a lot of anxiety for the devotees as they try to fit in Krishna into their already predestined mode of this is what I want life to be. Instead, what we must do is to strategize and say that this is not working. I want deeper absorption, but I still can't walk away from my responsibilities. So please, Krishna, I'm going to continue doing what I have to do. I will tolerate the circumstances and I will accept the arrangements that you have made. This is Trinadapi Sunichena, but I will constantly aspire for being able to do Kirtaniya Sadahari. Then Krishna himself will intervene, which is his promise. He will preserve what we have and he'll carry what we lack. He will intervene and the future could be molded and directed based on these desires and the sincerity of these desires and the extent to which we are sincere to a situation that is very conducive so that we could eventually be situated in goodness. So I'm saying strategize for goodness. It is long-term planning. You have to desire it, and we have to desire after an understanding that the present circumstances, however it is, are contributing to Krishna consciousness. But what is wonderful is we can do a lot more absorbed service, more time for Krishna, less time for maintenance. So if we strategize, Krishna will give us the intelligence and the resources to be able to reach that condition, is the point I want to make. So I guess I was answering this from the perspective of rearranging life. But what I was wanting to also emphasize is that there is a need for an environment and there's also a need for desire. So both are required. So fixing ourselves in the mode of goodness requires an environment and requires a particular desire of internal aspects as well. So the more we are involved in things that are not connected, the greater the challenges. So we need to kind of strategize to, unplug and do a greater contribution to our devotional service. So I'm not sure if this addressed Prabhu's question, but
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribol.
Thank you again for being with us this morning. Really appreciate your time and insights, and thank you for that insight and answer. So I take away the 2 points of environment and desire. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. The next question is, what would you say are the minimum requirements for us to be qualified to take initiation from a guru? How can we overcome feeling unqualified for initiation, even if we do chant 16 rounds following the 4 regs and are engaged in service? Actually, this is from Lakshmi. We are unqualified. So there really isn't any need for us to convince ourselves that we are qualified. So we are completely unqualified to be a part of what Lord Chaitanya has given us. There's no one, even the chanter of 64 rounds, who can claim that they are qualified. No one is qualified for the gift which Lord Chaitanya is going to give us. No one. This is the particular magic of Lord Chaitanya, is that he is practically given all the compassion from his heart, which is the compassion of Srimati Radharani. He bestowed all that compassion about Lord Nityananda. He gave all the compassion from his heart onto Lord Nityananda and told him, distribute my mercy. And Lord Nityananda, carrying the compassion of Lord Chaitanya, which is actually carrying the compassion of Srimati Radharani, which is boundless, which is infinite, he's distributing what one cannot even imagine in the streets of the Western and the Eastern worlds so freely by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. He's practically the agency of Srila Prabhupada. Lord Nityananda's mercy is floating around everywhere. So to answer your question, first and foremost, being completely unqualified is the truth, regardless of how many rounds we can chant. Even the Mahabhagavat feels unqualified. Even Advaita Acharya felt unqualified to distribute this particular mission. So that is perfectly fine, that particular mood. The second is, can we qualify ourselves to chant 16 rounds and 4 regs, and then we can take initiation from a guru? My experience of Krishna consciousness, which is also the Shastric conclusion, is that it is very organic. There is karma, and then there are desires. Karma makes us completely unqualified, but desires can make us qualified by coming in touch with those who have very deep desires. So first and foremost, there has to be sadhu sangha, where there's very deep desire to engage in the service of the Lord. And that particular sadhu sangha will practically give us the enthusiasm of the sadhu, because the sadhu has faith, the sadhu has sambandha in their hearts. They have the ability to pass on that sambandha through the sound vibration onto us. So as we engage in pranipatena, pariprashnena, sevaya, Bhakti Devi transfers herself from the heart of the sadhu into our hearts. So the point being, continue chanting 16 rounds, continue following the 4 regulative principles very steadily, and desire of wanting to formally connect to Srila Prabhupada, offer personal prayers to Srila Prabhupada to connect you within his movement to one of his sons, who is in the line of being able to give you inspiration. Srila Prabhupada will make that arrangement. It's very organic. It's very organic. When Krishna sees in the heart that you are very sincere, he will manifest himself externally to inspire you. It is said that we are inspired by 2 different agencies. We are inspired by the agency of the Guru. We are inspired by the agency of Harinam. Krishna personifies in the Guru. Krishna also personifies fully in Harinam. So we become inspired. So it's a matter of becoming inspired, and Krishna starts attracting you through one of his servants. Then what does happen is everything else is very organic. So seek inspiration. If inspiration doesn't exist and you don't feel inspired, pray to Srila Prabhupada and cry out for help, saying, I'm not very inspired. What could I do? If inspiration doesn't exist, offer menial service in the Kshetra, wherever you are, whichever temple. That always helps immensely. Offer menial service. Sweep the floor, pick up a mop. All forms of identity would become squashed. And once you hold on to a sweeping mop, and we hold on to a bucket of water, we are just servants. It's so simple. And then it becomes very easy to accept instructions, and then Krishna finds us being very qualified. So I'm saying you're very much on the right path, and feeling unqualified is wonderful because that is the truth. Even for the most qualified, feeling unqualified to receive Lord Chaitanya's mercy is the truth, because what's being given to us is unimaginable. That is the reason why, as one advances, they become humble, because they become humbled by the gift they've received. And as a consequence, you're right, very much on the right path. I hope this answers your question. If I have any, I'm not sure if there's any more time or anything, so I can answer one or two questions. It's up to you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Bhaktimandas. Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I have a question. You made some fantastic points about early on when you mentioned that it's there are people who have had certain relationship problems, who have had other problems, and yet they're in devotional service. They're getting devotional service. So, and you also made the point about Gyanis who want to just come out of the material world because it's full of suffering. So actually, at a preliminary stage, we sometimes may think that my situation is comfortable, so I can be okay just chanting. Or if someone comes to you, the idea is obviously the idea of paradukha dukhi and parasukha sukhi. That's the Vaishnava principle. In the suffering of others, we see our own. So if for example, when we see people who are in actual great difficulty and want to actually have some interest in Krishna consciousness, but simply because of their physical material situation, because they're struggling so much, they can't prioritize on Krishna consciousness. In your experience, how can they be sort of dealt with in a reasonable way without actually just imposing Krishna consciousness or anything on them with that, but then creating that space in their life where they can actually come to practicing Krishna consciousness even at a preliminary stage? What are your thoughts?
Actually, so it's a wonderful question, a really wonderful question, and this is basically the qualification of being able to understand and empathize with the suffering of others is the pre-qualification. Harinam, chanting of Harinam, brings forth two qualities. One, it brings forth the quality of humility. Humility comes due to Harinam chanting because one realizes that they are completely unqualified to receive what's been given. And the more they experience Krishna consciousness, the greater would be the level of humility. And humility is a prerequisite for everything else. Now, the other part to it is compassion. So one also needs compassion. So Harinam gifts one with a soft heart, and one becomes extraordinarily compassionate. They become extraordinarily compassionate because Harinam gives them the compassion as well. Now, in Srila Prabhupada's case, Srila Prabhupada, for instance, was literally empathizing with the suffering of souls because of his extraordinarily compassionate nature, which is the gift of Harinam. But yet he felt quite powerless, which can be seen by the prayers that he uttered before going on Jaladuta. The Jaladuta prayers, he basically feels completely unqualified to be used by his guru because he has no qualities whatsoever to assist those who are in such immense suffering. So when one is chanting Harinam very deeply, they develop a very deep sense of compassion and they feel powerless, but they're also humble enough to step aside so that Krishna can use them. So in our practice, we need to have both, and that is how we are going to be used for us to recognize how to alleviate the suffering of others so that we have the ability to step aside when Krishna wants to use us as instruments. This is just one part of what I just wanted to share with you, not the direct answer itself. Now, the other part to it is that the nature of suffering itself has to be understood. And what we can do to shatter that particular nature of suffering is to bring in touch that particular devotee, particular soul with prasadam and with kirtan. And understanding that they're as valuable to the movement as much as one who is fully accomplished in rendering service. There was this incident in New York City when Srila Prabhupada was in. There was a Bhakta John who had mental issues, and he was a part of the Sangha in the 26 Second Avenue Sangha when Srila Prabhupada was there. And this Bhakta John, his behavior was quite erratic, and he didn't know how to deal with Srila Prabhupada. But Srila Prabhupada was extraordinarily patient with him, etc. Then, one particular visit when Srila Prabhupada was visiting Europe or San Francisco, this Bhakta John basically committed suicide. He couldn't take it. Srila Prabhupada returned back to Sangha, to the 26 Second Avenue Sangha, and then, to the surprise of all the devotees there, who were all very accomplished preachers, they had accomplished many things, they were all running projects very successfully, he started asking them about Bhakta John. He said, "Where is Bhakta John? I can't see him. I really can't see him. Where is he?" And then one of them informed Srila Prabhupada that Bhakta John had left the world and he had committed suicide. He took his own life because his mental issues were so intense that he didn't want to live. Then Srila Prabhupada, the moment he heard it, closed his eyes and went into some kind of a trance. And for almost a few seconds, there was complete silence. He didn't speak. And then he opened his eyes, and the devotees asked him, saying, "Srila Prabhupada, you went into a trance." Those days, the early devotees didn't know how to deal with the spiritual master. You never ask the spiritual master about what he is thinking because it's not proper etiquette. But they were all very new and they were very sincere. And as a consequence, Srila Prabhupada basically responded. He said, "I was requesting Krishna that Bhakta John come into the womb of one of my disciples." So that was the compassion of Srila Prabhupada. But what do we learn from that example? We learn that we should never, ever think that anyone is insignificant when they come into one of our temples, one of our yatras, when we come in touch with them, regardless of what they can do or not do for us, simply because of the fact that they are invitees by Lord Chaitanya himself. How can there be any randomness in someone walking into Lord Chaitanya's temple? That's nothing random about that, nothing at all. So that's the first point, is that we take care of them by ensuring that they have come in. The next is to strategize what they can absorb. One is to show them some compassion, so we can offer prasadam and we can engage them in kirtan. We can offer some menial service that would really assist them at that point. This is basically what we can do. So this whole concept of feeding Krishna prasadam to devotees outside, souls outside, is a very powerful way to attract these souls, and we combine it with Harinam as well. But that is basically what we need to do. We need to constantly understand that Lord Chaitanya considers everyone important, regardless of where we are. I'm not sure if I addressed it from a practical basis, but the last part was a practical aspect. You can only give prasadam and kirtan and engage them in menial service, because menial service is wonderful. Srila Rupa Goswami wants us to engage our limbs. If there is any kind of engagement of limbs, we would be qualified to receive the opportunity for greater level of Krishna consciousness. So engage the limbs of the devotees in service.
Fantastic, Prabhu. That's a powerful answer, and I'm really, really amazed. Really, really. Thank you, Prabhu. Fantastic, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Jai
Hare
Shri
Krishna.
Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, can I ask a question?
Yes, please. Absolutely. Yes.
So when Bhaktiman Prabhu asked this question about relationships issues, I was just thinking about relationship issues within devotee circles. So I will not say issues, let's say ups and downs. So how do we see that then, Prabhu? Is Krishna's arrangement, or is it our free will, getting a lot of free will? Sorry.
Very good. Okay, so see, the first and foremost important aspect is, when we use the word devotees, it's always Krishna's arrangement. Krishna is involved. He is involved. And this is something which we should never forget, regardless of how bad or how good an experience is. Never forget that when a devotee is involved or the temple environment is involved, Krishna is involved. It's never to be forgotten. That's the first principle. Then there are two aspects to it. The aspect is, how do you process an event which is unpalatable, which doesn't fit into the Shastric conclusion of what a devotee should be? doesn't fit into what we would call as proper etiquette for Vaishnavas to deal with each other. First and foremost, sometimes we also hear this. We sometimes hear that the behavior of temple devotees, behavior of devotees who are associated with the movement in the temple, etc., is so bad that I would rather have my karmi friends as company because they basically are much better in dealing with each other. That is not the conclusion of the acharyas, though. Because even though there can be poor understanding of relationships, poor behavior from devotees who are practicing Krishna consciousness, they are still practicing Krishna consciousness. As long as they're doing the sadhana well, they are practically practicing Krishna consciousness in such a way that we are able to see that they will make progress at some point in the future. So we want to understand it from the perspective that they are going to make progress sometime in the future. That's the first principle. Second is, how do you process it? How do I process it? Because if we are the affected party, how do we process this? The way we process it is to understand that the verse Trinadapi Sunichena Taroriva Sahishnuna Amani Manadena Kirtanya Sadahari means, first and foremost, that the acceptance of what is the environment given to us as Krishna's environment is very important. What is humility? Humility is all about accepting the arrangement made by the Lord. If the Lord is giving us an experience, then that particular experience is also a part of what we need to accept. So first and foremost, accept it, because that's the definition of humility. We accept the arrangement made by the Lord. The next is we tolerate the circumstances. And then we do our very best to engage in service in that environment, accepting it as Krishna's arrangement. It may not be Krishna's arrangement. It could just be the bad karma of the devotees involved. Bad behavior comes from bad karma. There might be anarthas, which is why they are behaving the way they are. It may not be, but if we accept it as Krishna's arrangement, it will become Krishna's arrangement, which is the power of instruction. This is exactly what is being spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita 9.22, he says that I will preserve what you have, I will carry what you lack. Now, why should we think that the present environment that we are in, where we are in today, is not arranged by the Lord? Why should we think that, oh, Krishna has not made the arrangement? In the Bhagavad Gita, he says he will preserve what I have and he'll carry what I lack. I think he is going to make that arrangement. That would be a wrong understanding. Krishna has already made that arrangement. What we have today, if it is accepted by us in light of what he has spoken in the Bhagavad Gita as his own arrangement, with all the difficulties that we face, with all the poor relationship, the initial first step is to accept it. If you accept it as Krishna's arrangement, then it will become Krishna's arrangement and we will grow out of it rather than becoming encumbered and thinking that this is such a negative thing. So we accept it first, that this is your arrangement, my dear Lord. You love me. How could you put me through something which is bad for me? I accept it. This is basically your arrangement. And then we tolerate the circumstances and we act out in what is considered to be proper. The what is considered to be proper in terms of how to act out is a different topic altogether. Yeah, but the first topic is accepting. If we don't accept it, we are going to run away. Accept it first because it is Krishna. It is Krishna's arrangement. He's going to teach us. There are going to be all kinds of lessons to be learned. And this is exactly what our environments are. That's why interaction is important. When you interact, you come in touch with all kinds of challenges and it breaks down our own shell and sharpens our focus on improvements and Krishna consciousness. I hope this makes sense. What I'm saying is, from a practical perspective, accept it. That is what you need to do because it's Krishna's arrangement. Even if it is not Krishna's arrangement, accept it because it is Krishna's arrangement. That's the answer.
Thank you for a wonderful reply, Prabhu. That's really profound. Thank you very much.
Sure. Any other question or comment? Oh, I want to see if there's something on chat, and then.
Yeah.
Okay. I believe not. So. Yeah, it's up to you for you to go on to the next part. Yeah, if there aren't any questions, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do the class.